Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marion Sargent, President of the Launceston Historical Society, and I welcome you all here today. I extend a special welcome to new members, visitors, and to everyone out there watching on Zoom. And I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this event is taking place. Our next meeting is here on Sunday the 21st of August, when Jay Patterson will tell us about researching Launceston's 19th century hotels. And no doubt that'll be a popular topic. Right. Now, we were to have two speakers today, but only John has turned up. So, only John's here today, could make it. So he'll present the second reinstated Mead Smith von Stieglitz lecture on the Annandale Community Archaeology dig held in April last year. And John is a surveyor and an avid historian, and Darren Watton, who is going to be our other speaker, is an archaeologist who led the thing. Well, they led a team of 23 volunteers who did some excavating at Annandale, which is between Perth and Patina Road. And was anyone here? I know a couple of people were. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Good. 4? Yeah. So John will tell us about the results of the excavation, the artefacts that were found and the preliminary findings as to the date of the building and some of the possible uses. So I'll now ask John to come forward. So welcome, John.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Marion. And Darren does send his apologies when I rang him shortly and said a little while ago, and he thought it was next week, so he's sorry. He's a very clever man, but sometimes dates and times don't quite always register. I'm very honoured to present the Mead Smith von Stieglitz lecture. Mead Smith von Stieglitz lecture, because in the research that we've been doing, a lot of the information we access is from these three northern authors. Isabella Mead produced a book on Kelso, and the early settlement around Kelso, which I've used extensively in the Yorktown publication. Roy Smith was an architect, but he also had a book on the early Tasmanian bridges, and John Lee Archer, which in the Kerry Lodge dig that we did, a lot of information came out of that. And of course, Carl von Stieglitz, I think I've got must be half or more of his 38 books, but I still access the others at the library, and they always provide excellent first-hand, often oral testimony, but also terrific information around local history, and very much gathered information at a time when there were not very many records accessible or available as there are now. And so it's really given us a really good window into that time period when he was writing, and I'm in awe of what they were achieved with so little information that was so much more readily available now. We are not Southern Archaeology. Those are Southern Archaeology. That's Darren on this side. He's tall. He's about this tall. Yeah. And Ian Edmondson, he's the other archaeologist that were on this project. The volunteers, there were a number of people down the bottom there. Sue and Peter are here today, and I think Ruth may be online as well. We've got an online audience as well, a number of people online, I'm aware. G'day, those online. The dig wouldn't be possible without having those experienced volunteers to be able to assist us in organising the trenches and making sure that the volunteers are not going to just hack into something with a spade or do something that they shouldn't do, and it's impossible to do without those volunteers helping and assisting the project. This is an area of the lands of the Northern Midlands Nation, and in terms of when we're undertaking excavation, there's always possibilities that we'll uncover Aboriginal artefacts. I recently uncovered my first Aboriginal artefact, and I was very pleased that I could identify it as such, and it's always exciting when you can find that. Unfortunately, because of the protocols involved, it did stop the dig on that trench, not this one, a different one, but that's what we do. We try and ensure that we respect the Aboriginal culture that came before European settlement and continues on today, and we respect and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we dig and on which we are here today. Annandale. There's an earliest settlement. It's in. I've got a map coming up shortly. That's the image. How do I do the pointy bit? That's it. Oh yeah, nifty. Hang on. That's it. Wow, never had this before. This is the building from a high drone. So you can see there was a sort of a more recent roof put over it for storage of farm products. This is in the middle of a farm, and the farmer has fenced around the paddock, fenced around the area so that stock is kept away from it. You can see there's a bit of a lean on this wall out there. But from the early 1809, 1810, grants were starting to spread out from the south of Launceston into this particular area, which was sort of called the Breadalbane Plain at that early time period. Annandale is about there. So you can see Perth is here. That's the Midland Highway. It's on the hill, just on that straight leading into Perth. You can actually just see it if you look. If you know exactly where you're looking, it's very hard to. And then this is Patina Road, for those that know it. So we access it from Patina Road through Jessiefield property from the Hughes family and go up over the hill and into the top area in that location. So how do we come to be here? The Launceston Historical Society has an archaeological group, and we did an excavation at Kerry Lodge Probation Station in 2017, which is just south of Franklin Village on the Midlands Highway. That dig was with Eleanor Casella, and we found the remains of the part of the probation station there at Kerry Lodge. A lot of bluestone brick, which is the Kerry Lodge Bridge. There's a lot of bluestone brick, bluestone stone. And I was contacted, that got some press coverage on the ABC and in the Examiner, and after that press coverage I was contacted by the landowner of Jessiefield, Peter Hughes, and asked me to come along. He had a interesting structure that they weren't quite sure exactly what it was, although he did have some ideas. It was about 26 metres by 6. That's a pretty big building. Two-storey stone building, no roof on it now, in 3 rooms, as you saw earlier. One room had a very large fireplace in it, and the other rooms only had a door and a window. He thought, or he had been told by Brian Bean and by others in the area, that they thought it could have either been a military barracks or a convict road station. The paddock name was actually called the Barracks, so that was sort of a bit of a hint, perhaps, but it's obviously what the farm owner had thought the building might have been at some point in time. Or it could have been a barn, just a farm structure, or even a house, or have some other use. So when we started this, we really didn't know what the actual use of the site was, and it was a bit of a mystery, I suppose. One of our volunteers, Sue Bell, did this sketch of the building, and as you can see, that's the part of the building there. It's a fairly substantial structure. A lot of stone was quarried and carted because there's no quarry anywhere near this site. So a large amount of stone was quarried and cut and carted and built in this location. It's at least a couple of kilometres away from the nearest sort of stone quarry we could reasonably identify as being likely to be where the stone for this building had come from. So it's it's not small. Some of the detail in it, you can see the level here where the first floor was, and so there's the top part, most of the top story has fallen down and disappeared, and whatever roof has disappeared off it as well and has gone. In the northern room, there was a few bricks in a fireplace. So you can see the fireplace, and that looked like it had probably been used for some sort of human habitation. Whereas the others just looked like they were sort of a storage area or a barn. So just sort of fairly quickly, the history of it was first granted to Theodore Bryant Bartley, and I believe there's some descendants of TBB here today. He was arrived in Australia. He came on the crew of the Ben Coolin in 1819 to Sydney, and then in 1821 came down to Tasmania or Van Diemen's Land with Governor Lachlan Macquarie on his second tour of the state. He was a tutor to Macquarie's son Lachlan, and so as the tutor he came along with the family when they did their tour of duty, and when Macquarie left, TBB decided that Tassie wasn't too bad a spot, and so he was given a 500-acre grant. In 1826, he took part in part of the capture of the Brady gang. He didn't capture Brady himself, but he managed to capture a couple of the Brady gang, and for his efforts he was awarded another 500-acre grant. We think it's those two 500-acre grants which make the 1,000-acre grant that this land is on. I'll give you a plan in a minute. The next owner after that, he sold it, 1,000 acres at Long Plain. It was called Henbury at that stage, to George Palmer Ball from Mountford and Mount Arnon, which are two properties in the immediate area. And it seems that Ball was the person who named it Annandale. Ball didn't own it for very long, as in 1840 he sold it to Charles Chilcott, who was a farmer at Cressy, for £1,500, and at that stage it had a comfortable residence and suitable outbuildings. We haven't found any other residence or other buildings on the site at this point in time other than the building we're looking at. In 1842 there were 20 people living there. There were 17 free people, and after that it was leased to George Church of Cressy, and then when Charles Chilcott died in 1869 it was advertised for sale. There was 1,000 acres at Annandale, a 6-room cottage, a 6-stall stable, a large store and other buildings. So we don't know at this point if the 6-room cottage, it doesn't look like a cottage, it's got 3 rooms, not 6. Whether it was a 6-stall stable, it hasn't got 6 rooms, or it could have stalls in one of the rooms. It could have been a large store. It could have fitted that description, or it could have been other buildings. So the mystery continues. This is the 1,000-acre grant to Bartley. You can see coming around down there, that's about where the building is located. This is all a big plain with creeks running through it. Dryden is the next door property. Haggerstone is the property adjacent to that. Here's a bit easier one to see. So you can see it's called the Long Plain. This is about where the building is here up on top of the hill. This is the road out to Perth, Midlands Highway. Perth's just here. This is Patina Road down this side here. And this road running through from Kerry Lodge, this goes from Kerry Lodge right through, that was built in about 1833 or thereabouts, and then there was a side road that linked through to Perth. So there is some possibility that this building could have been built to house convicts building these roads, although at this point we haven't found any evidence to indicate that it is. The later owners were in 1873. Eventually the land was sold to William Mason. And I believe there might be some members of the Mason family here today. Is anyone? Well, they could be online, I think. They may be online. He arrived in 1818, and in 1840 he bought Norwich, which was the property on Patina Road, between Annandale and Patina Road. He also owned 287 acres between those two properties along Jordan's Creek, which was called the station. And we think, after quite a lot of research, that's probably the site of the Norfolk Plains East Road Station. So all the evidence we've got seems to point to the fact that that was the location where the Horseshoe Bridge on Patina Road was built from convicts based at a bit later date in the 1840s. And with the agreement of the owner, we've had a look on site. We haven't found the site yet, but we're still on the hunt for the Norfolk Plains East Road Station. So we'll maybe let you know how we go on that later. The land, when William Mason passed away, his son Henry Mason had the land, and he died in 1920. And his sons put the land up for sale. And in October 1920, it was sold to Lindsay and Lloyd Hughes. And 122 years later, the land still remains in the Hughes family. And Peter Hughes is the current owner. And it was because of his interest in this site that we were able to, and his agreement for letting us all tramp over his property for a week in April 2021, that this was possible. So thank you very much, Peter. This is just a plan in 1865 from the actual title deed to the property, and the buildings are here in this location at this bottom corner of the L-shaped block. You can see Mason also owned Norwich next door to it. So the community dig. We decided that we would, it was a suitable site to be able to hold a dig, and I'd approached Darren Watton, who I'd done some archaeology volunteer work with, and he agreed to supervise the dig, because every dig we do, we need to ensure that we do it properly and responsibly and appropriately by having a qualified archaeologist involved. Us enthusiastic amateurs, even though we might think we know a lot, don't know anything when it comes to archaeology in terms of the detail, the recording. When you undertake archaeology, you're in fact destroying the very thing that you're interested in. And so you have a responsibility to be able to record that information that you find so that others can see exactly what you've seen and what's been destroyed by your activity. So the participants, we advertised for participants to attend and pay to attend for the whole week or just for a day, and experience a real hands-on archaeological dig. They had to be a member of the Historical Society to do that for insurance purposes. We had up to 10 on any one day, with Darren and Ian as the supervising archaeologists and the others of us there as volunteers, which were helping to be in each of the trenches and supervising the trenches whilst Darren and Ian went between the various trenches. Everyone had hands-on digging experience. They actually dug in the dirt and found things, and in the lunch breaks and at other times we'd have fairly detailed and interactive talk on various aspects of archaeology on the various days. So we tried to provide the participants with a good variety of information and get some real hands-on experience of what archaeology was like. Each participant received a certificate and a copy of the report, not small. and some are here today, as we've got one, and some others online, I believe. So this is some shots of us working on site. You can see here there's a trench in the corner of the middle building, and there's just a drone shot of the drones. And we had a barbecue on the last day for the volunteers, just to provide a sort of end to the process. This, in between the northern and the middle room, we think might have been an oven. We didn't know before we started the dig, but in looking at it, we think that this could very well have been. There's a gap between the two buildings. We think that might be an actual large oven. So that fireplace that's next to it might have been a kitchen. There's no point in doing it unless we've got some sort of outcomes or some reason for doing a community dig. We really wanted to make sure that the participants had a good experience of archaeology and what it was like to do archaeology in Tasmania, and also to understand the significance of the site and try to undertake and come up with some understandings of what it was used for, when it was built, and really what it was there for, why it was in that location. And that's one of the participants enjoying digging sieving in the dirt. We undertook all of the procedures that you would normally take on a commercial archaeological dig. It was a real dig. So an archaeological method statement was prepared in the beginning to identify what the aims and objectives were, how it was going to be undertaken, what was going to be done, and what the results and the reports were to be provided at the end of it. Everything was done by hand. We had no machinery to assist. A number of the foundations and the surfaces were exposed, cleaned, explored. Everything was photographed and recorded. As you go down through each layer, everything was recorded and photographed. All material was sieved, as you saw on the previous one with the sieving. All of the artefacts were located and recorded in situ where possible and were photographed. They were bagged, recorded, and as you've seen, the report was produced at the end of the process, as that follows the normal process of a commercial archaeological dig. So there were 4 trenches were dug in the end. There were 3 rooms of the building. The bigger one at this end with the wall bowing out, the one with the roof in the middle, or partial roof in the middle, and then the kitchen or possible kitchen site in the north side. And then out the side here, there were a few rocks poking up above the ground, and so we exposed the rocks in Trench 4. This is Trench 4, so there's quite a rectangular structure with a floor of quite substantial rock structure, possibly a stable or a store of some description. That's one of the post holes that were dug and identified, and you can see the kitchen area at the side there. So the Zoom can't see my laser. Sorry about that. I'll get rid of the laser. I'll just use the big pointy white thing when we get to that. This is the northern room, the kitchen. So you can see the oven structure there being cleaned up, and we think is probably an oven on the top. The bottom one we think is the fireplace, or we're certain it's a fireplace. There was enough ash and other things, wasn't it, Peter? Peter was in charge of that one. So it was also a double-storey building. And why was it here? What was it? It's still really, even with all this, it was hard. So we had, perhaps the artefacts can tell us some of the story. There were 1,311 artefacts recorded. a lot of ceramic, earthenware, particularly in room 1, which was the northern one, the kitchen. So you can see some of the dates there, the 1840 to 1880s, the cut sponge earthenware, and grey transferware Rhine was around from the late 1800s. It was mostly, the ceramics was mostly in room 1. And as Darren says, if there's no willow, then there's something wrong. Guess what? We didn't find any willow. It was really surprising because willow is just about everywhere. It was ubiquitous in every site we've ever dug. There's always willow. Every site we've ever dug that has human occupation or for habitation purposes. So it does create some sort of a mystery in this site, although the kitchen area, the northern trench 1, we were only able to get access to about a third of the floor of that building because there's a large, it's been used to store wire and other farm debris, and so so we were only able to get access to part of that floor, so there might be other things in that site. So that's one of the reasons we might need to go back and find the willow pattern. Clay pipes, there's some really good clay pipes on site. And you can see a couple of examples here on the side. 9 clay pipe fragments in all from room 1. Couple from Tom McDougall, one from W. White, and a Danish pipe bowl. Look, it's amazing how many international pipes and other things came to Tasmania, Van Diemen's Land in those early days. There was an enormous market in bringing goods to Australia and into Tasmania from all over the world, and so it's not surprising to find some of these things from as far away as Denmark. We didn't find an enormous amount, and the dates are all in that sort of from the 1840s, 50s sort of time frame onwards. This is just a graph showing the bottle glass. There was a considerable amount of bottle glass found in the site. Not those glasses, bottle glass. What was the most we found of any artefact? It was nails. But the nails we found were pretty much mostly hand-wrought square-shanked nails, which date from around 1804 settlement date right through to probably going out of use around 1860. So in fact, this was one of the sort of best dating. The nail, you wouldn't have thought, was one of the best evidences we had of the date, and the nails were part of the original construction, or most likely part of that original construction, probably of the floor, either in the base or on the first floor, because the first floor has all disappeared. It was likely to be a timber floor because of the weight and the fact that you could see part of the timber floor still existing on side of the building. So the nails were everywhere. 41% of the total were the hand-wrought nails, and so that dates the building back to pre-1860, but probably earlier than that date, which was when the nails really started to be replaced by other types of nail. A couple of really interesting ones, we found a couple of chisels sitting vertically in the ground near Trench 4, which was that flagstone floor, and a number of buttons. So those buttons obviously come off people's clothing, and it was not able to identify particularly whether it was either convict or it was just no particular type of information from the buttons other than people were there. And of course we didn't find any willow. Chinese hand-painted porcelain is good because that dates it to pre-1840, so we didn't find any of that, which means it might not be that very early date. A lot of bottles can give you particularly good dating evidence. We didn't find a coin with an 1840 date on it or anything like that to tell us exactly when it was dropped, or any personal items or convict-related items. And of course, there was no plaque that said that it was who it was built it by. You never get that. So what do we know? The building was built prior to 1860, we think, and most likely around that 1835 to 1840 time period. We'd need to have some more information, more artefacts to be able to pin down exactly when that date was. Room 1 certainly had a domestic function that was the one with the oven and the fireplace. So possibly a kitchen, and maybe the living was above in that second story. So that's why potentially there's not a lot of artefacts on the ground floor. Most of the living was possibly on the upper floor, with the other 2 rooms either as store or as animal or food or farm produce stores. So it may have been a building that served all of the functions of a farm. It is a bit unusual in the sense that around that time there were, if you had a farm property, you would usually build a fairly large house, a farm, a mansion on the property. It was that's where a lot of our existing sort of Midlands and through that whole area, a lot of those substantial buildings were built around that time period. And to build a building as utilitarian, I suppose, as this 26 by 6 metre structure, 2-storey structure, is probably a fairly unusual type of situation on a 1,000-acre property in this sort of location. So it is a little bit puzzling. There are a number of buildings like this that are actually barns. For instance, Woolmer's has a structure similar to this, and so does Brickenden. A number of others of contemporary time periods have a large barn like this, but to have the house, the accommodation, the barn and the store all in one building, I suppose is a bit puzzling, which makes it interesting. And so the other surface that's outside, that's away from the building, could have been a stable. Didn't look big enough to be a 6-stall stable, which was in the ad in 1870. So whether there are other buildings that are not yet located on the site, we don't know. Bit of ground penetrating radar might be handy, but unfortunately that's rather expensive to obtain and get in Tassie. And so we are left with still a mystery. Even though the dig happened, was successful, there's still some unanswered questions. So we've still got those options. We've got the options of the military barracks or a convict station. Maybe an inn, there was a road nearby, or a house or accommodation for workers, or a barn or a service building. We think it's probably unlikely to be a military barracks or a convict station. Perth isn't very far away, and there was a major military barracks and convict station at Perth from very early on, from certainly the 1820s onwards. And so for this to exist so close to that is rather unusual. Plus, just back towards Patina Road, there was the Norfolk Plains East Convict Station, which was in the 1840s when Patina Road was being relocated from the closer, where it was originally closer to the river, which was subject to a lot of flooding, and it was moved to its current location, and that's when the Norfolk Plains East Road Station was located there. So this is sort of midway between Perth and Patina, and why it was here, if it was a government structure, it's a little bit hard to know. We haven't got any evidence from any documentation, any maps or plans or any correspondence we can find that relates to this as either a military barracks or a convict station. We doubt it's an inn either. There were a number of inns in Perth, including one just on the Launceston side of Perth, and there doesn't seem to be any particular need or commercial justification for having an inn in this fairly remote and location. It was only a sort of a by-road, a side road between Perth and Patina, which wouldn't have attracted very many people. It wasn't a major road between Launceston and Perth, or Launceston and Longford, or anything in that nature. So it's not likely to have had much traffic on the road, enough to support an inn. House or accommodation for workers, that looks to be the most likely situation at the present time. Maybe it could have been a barn or a service building, and I think probably a combination of those last two options. It looks like it was a combination building which had accommodation, kitchen in the northern end, probably some accommodation for sleeping and living purposes on an upper storey, and then storage for farm produce on the other two rooms on the lower level. But that's where we're at the moment in terms of this interpretation of the site. It's certainly not clear, it's not certain, and there are still questions. We didn't answer everything. So what do we think it might be? As I've said, we think it's an accommodation service building, built around 1835 to 40. Probably had accommodation and the kitchen to feed quite a few people on site. It was still a substantial effort for the person who built it to cut, cart, construct all of the stone and cut the timber for the building. It's a very major undertaking and would not have been cheap to do. So it's a bit of a mystery. The option is the digging didn't solve it, but it potentially could. We think that there's likely to be more evidence in the northern building, the kitchen building, in the floor and in front of the oven. So it's likely that there might be some further evidence there in relation to what the age and use of the building may have been. With the permission of the owner, we hope to be able to clear out room 1 completely and do a further excavation on that. The tentative dates have been set for the 3rd to the 8th of October. Put that in your diaries, everyone. And we might see if we can find or get, or beg, borrow, not steal, some GPR or something to look at the surrounding area around the building to see if there was a more traditional cottage, as was indicated in some of the advertising of the time period when it was sold, or something else that indicates the stables or other structures, or try and give some sort of context to what this is and why it's just stuck in a hill in the middle of a paddock, which would have cost some thousands of dollars to build at that time. It was not a cheap exercise to have built this building at the time, even with convict labour, which they could have had. So you can see also here, this is a map, Cornwall 31 from around the 1830s. That's the Bartley's grant there, and the site's about there in the middle where I'm pointing, for where or probably a bit down this way, where the stone structure is. If you look down here, you can see there's a sign here that says a house. So there is a house located nearby on a different grant, on the adjoining grant, but also nearby. And you can see that there is some archaeology still remaining in this location. There's some walls. So we'll be able to, with the permission of the owner of that land as well, we've been able to obtain permission to do that. Darren did a recent excavation at the Perth convict station, and nearby on private property adjoining that, is the remains of the a police station in this location here. You can sort of see some line work going around there. So there was a police station here in the 1840s, and there's still evidence of that police station on the ground. It's also next to the Esk Brewery, and it's on private property, but once again the landowner has provided us with permission to be able to undertake an excavation on that site to try and find out a bit about this earliest police station in the Perth area and try and find out what was happening at that particular site. So that's 21st to 25th of November. Tentative dates at this stage. Further details will be sent out through the Launceston Historical Society newsletter once we sort out all the loose ends. There's a lot of work in organising these digs, landowner safety, all of the other components that go with organising a team of people to be on site without normal facilities. As I said, it's a lot of time and effort to organise these, which we will undertake and will do. We had a few issues. This was the first sort of major community dig we'd undertaken. We did the Kerry Lodge one, but this is the first one we'd done after that. Volunteers were excellent, and without their help and assistance, it would not be possible to undertake such an excavation. Few things that we could be better from the feedback received from the participants. The toileting aspects need some improvement. We had some issues with that, and through unavailability of portaloos at the time, and so we managed, hopefully, to get through the process, but it was rustic. I think would be a fair concern, wouldn't it? Very rustic is a nod. Yes, we hope to improve that. Look, charging for this is difficult. We had to hire the archaeological expertise to be able to do it. It's his business. Darren did provide us with a substantial discount on his normal commercial rates. The money we raised from the participants basically covered his on-site field time, but in writing that report and putting that report together, he did that basically for nothing. And it's a substantial. And without the report, there's no point in doing a dig, because unless you replace what you damage and remove on site with a report, it's vandalism. You have to have an end result from the dig that can capture what was found, so that anybody else can come along and find and understand what was found at that particular point in time, and then build on it with more information. As more information becomes available, or as more excavations become available, this is what is left after you've gone from the site. And if we don't produce a report, then we're irresponsible in not being able to fully undertake the responsibilities we need to for such old and historic and heritage buildings. So we're going to need to look at some sort of ideas around the charging of that, and we'll be putting out some details of that shortly. Access was also a concern, a fairly long access road into the property and then across paddocks. We were very lucky that the weather was kind to us. A shower or two, but nothing that prevented us from being able to get to the site. And the landowner